largest navies, which was France and Germany. It was a battle of courage, and it was a battle of keeping going through dreadful conditions out in the North Atlantic. 1941 to 1942. This is when the biggest losses were experienced in the mid-Atlantic, which the Germans called their happy hunting ground, where convoys had no protection because quite often their escort ships had moved away.
In 1991, a group of civilian divers stumbled upon a sunken submarine off the coast of New Jersey, where no U-boat should have been. The mystery deepened when they uncovered it wasn't just any wreck, but the U-869, a German vessel lost during World War II, far from its supposed grave near Gibraltar.
De milliers de mètres cubes de béton armé autour de nous, façon à rendre l'alvéole totalement sécurisé.
This discovery shattered decades of history. As the divers uncovered secrets hidden in the wreck, they unearthed shocking truths that could change everything we thought we knew about the war and the silent, deadly operations beneath the waves. The truth, however, was darker than anyone imagined. The story begins with the mystery of the U-869, a German U-boat that vanished without a trace during World War II. German submarines, or U-boats, were one of the most feared weapons of the war. These vessels were designed to strike swiftly and silently, wreaking havoc on Allied shipping lines. Their presence in the Atlantic was a constant threat to Allied naval forces, cutting off vital supply routes and sinking countless ships. The U-869 was one of these vessels. Built in 1943, it was a Type IX C40 U-boat, one of the largest and most advanced of its class. At nearly 250 feet long and equipped with 6 torpedo tubes, the U-869 was capable of traveling across vast expanses of the Atlantic Ocean, striking enemy ships deep within Allied-controlled waters. Its mission was clear: to disrupt, destroy, and disappear. Commanded by Captain Helmut Neuerberg, a seasoned officer with years of naval experience, the U-869 set sail on its first combat patrol in late 1944. The submarine was directed toward the Mediterranean, a strategic area where Allied ships were known to pass through. Gibraltar, a critical point in the Mediterranean that connected to the Atlantic, was an important target. But as the war reached its final stages, chaos began to take its toll on the German war machine. Communication breakdowns, conflicting orders, and a collapsing chain of command muddled the U-869's mission. The official account from wartime reports placed the U-869 in the vicinity of Gibraltar. On February 11, 1945, a U.S. destroyer and a Coast Guard cutter reported engaging and sinking an unidentified German U-boat. According to the Allies, this attack had sunk U-869. The report made no mention of survivors, and no distress calls had been received from the submarine. The submarine was presumed lost in action, and its crew of 56 men were thought to have gone down with it. For years, this version of events was accepted as fact. The U-869 had been destroyed near Gibraltar, its location recorded as one more casualty in the war's lengthy ledger. But as time went on, this simple explanation began to unravel. For decades, no one questioned the reports that placed the U-869's wreck near Gibraltar. But as historians and researchers began digging deeper into the case, things started to seem off. First, there were no confirmed photographs or sonar images of a wreck matching the dimensions or specifications of the U-869 near Gibraltar. Wartime records, often hastily written during or after the chaos of battle, were notoriously unreliable. The reports had been based on visual sightings in the midst of combat, which were often unclear and inaccurate. Additionally, the technology of the time was limited, making it easy to misidentify a wreck. Second, there was no definitive documentation from the German Navy indicating the U-869's exact location at the time it was lost. By the end of 1945, Germany's military infrastructure was in disarray. Radio transmissions were lost, documents were destroyed, and the few records that survived were incomplete. The available logs painted a picture of confusion, with details that were vague or contradictory. Some experts, after reviewing the available records, began to suspect that the U-869 might never have reached Gibraltar at all. Adding to the mystery was the issue of radio silence. German U-boats were required to maintain communication throughout their missions, sending reports back to base to confirm their progress and receive updated orders. But after the U-869 was last heard from while still in the North Atlantic, far away from Gibraltar, there was complete silence. No distress signals, no communication from the crew, and no further sightings. It was as though the U-869 had simply vanished into the depths of the ocean, swallowed whole by the sea. As historians and researchers began to dig deeper, more questions began to surface. Was the submarine that was reported sunk near Gibraltar really the U-869? Could it have been misidentified during the chaotic final days of the war? Was the U-869 rerouted without anyone knowing? Or was something much stranger at play? These questions remained unanswered for decades, leaving the U-869's fate one of the most enduring mysteries of World War II. For the families of the crew, there was no closure. They had no wreck to mourn, no grave to visit. All they had was a name etched on a memorial and a wartime file that didn't quite add up. Even experts couldn't agree on what had happened. Military historians pointed to the report from Gibraltar and insisted that the case was closed. But for many, especially amateur sleuths and wreck hunters, the story didn't make sense. And so for more than 40 years, the U-869 remained a ghost ship, lost to time and buried in conflicting reports and faded memories. Then, in 1991, a group of divers made an incredible discovery. They were searching the waters off the coast of New Jersey when their sonar picked up an image of a long, narrow object lying on the ocean floor. It was deep, around 230 feet below the surface, but it didn't take long to realize that it was a submarine. And not just any submarine, but one that shouldn't have been there. What they found would change everything. This wasn't a U-boat that was supposed to be in the waters off the American coast. The wreck was old, badly damaged, and covered in sand and fishing nets. At first, the divers couldn't make out any markings or identification on the submarine, but it was clear that it was a German U-boat. The discovery of such a wreck off the New Jersey coast was a riddle that defied all logic. No known German U-boat from World War II had been reported lost in this area. The divers dubbed the wreck Yo-Hoo, a nickname for the mysterious find. They began returning to the wreck, diving again and again in search of more clues. Each dive brought back more pieces of evidence that suggested the wreck was a German submarine. Inside they found German gauges and equipment, including parts clearly marked with German naval symbols. They recovered small personal items and artifacts, such as bowls and plates, some of which were marked with the German eagle. But they didn't know for sure which U-boat it was. Then, on one dive, they discovered a butter knife, engraved with the name Hornberg. This wasn't a model number or a ship number, but a person's name. The divers traced this name to a real person, Georg Hornberg, a crewman who had served aboard U-869. This was the turning point. By cross-referencing this name with naval records and crew lists, the divers were able to confirm that the wreck they had found was in fact U-869. This discovery set off a chain of events that would eventually force the U.S. Navy to acknowledge that U-869 had not been sunk near Gibraltar, as previously believed. It had been lost off the American coast, 3,000 miles from where history had placed it. The divers had solved one of the most enduring mysteries of World War II without any government or military support, simply through their determination and years of dangerous exploration. Yet, despite finding the wreck, the true mystery of how U-869 ended up there remains unsolved. As the mystery of the U-869 deepened, the focus shifted to the wreck itself. The group of divers led by John Chatterton and Richie Kohler, along with a small team of experienced divers from the Northeast, had made the astonishing discovery of a submarine off the coast of New Jersey in 1991. The initial sonar image had sparked their curiosity, and their subsequent dives confirmed that it was indeed a German U-boat. However, what made this discovery so significant was that no German submarine from World War II had been reported lost anywhere near the US coast. In fact, this wreck was supposed to have been sunk off the coast of Gibraltar, more than 3,000 miles away. With no previous reports of such a loss, this posed an even greater mystery. Why was the wreck so far from its supposed sinking site? In the early stages of their investigation, the divers could only identify the wreck as a submarine, but not yet determine which one. The water conditions off New Jersey were notoriously difficult, with strong currents, low visibility, and deep dives. Diving in these conditions required not only technical expertise, but also patience and caution, as these dives were often dangerous. The wreck was located at a depth of 230 feet, and the divers had to use specialized dive equipment, such as trimix gas blends, which required careful planning and precise decompression stops to avoid serious health risks, such as nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity. The initial dives revealed a submarine that was badly damaged and partially buried in sand. The wreck was entangled in decades of fishing nets, and the hull was heavily corroded. The conning tower was crushed, and the outer body of the submarine was cracked. Despite these extensive damages, the team couldn't initially identify the submarine by its markings or hull number. There was no nameplate, no identifying symbols, nothing that could immediately confirm which vessel they had found. With no clear way to identify the wreck, the divers gave it a nickname, Yo-Hoo. It was an enigmatic find, as no known records had placed a German U-boat in the area. At that point, it was still a mystery whether it was a U-boat at all or perhaps a different type of submarine, foreign or otherwise. However, as they continued their exploration of the wreck, it became increasingly clear that this was no ordinary ship. It was a German U-boat, and it was likely one of the many that had operated in the Atlantic during World War II. The divers made several return expeditions to the site, each one bringing them closer to uncovering the wreck's identity. The dives were not quick. Each expedition required careful preparation. The risks were high, and each return dive involved meticulously planned procedures to ensure the safety of the team. Even though the visibility was poor, the divers were determined to uncover as much as they could from the wreck. During one of the later dives, the team found pieces of equipment and personal items that confirmed the submarine's German origin. The items they recovered included parts marked with the German Eagle insignia, which were standard on German naval equipment. They found metal pipes, valves and gauges marked with metric units, typical of German machinery. The clues were mounting, but the team still needed more evidence to identify the submarine. It wasn't until they discovered a small butter knife, tarnished but still intact, that the team made their breakthrough. The knife was engraved with the name Hornberg. This was not a model number or an insignia, but a personal name. This discovery was a turning point in the investigation. The divers used the name to trace it back to a real person, a crewman named Georg Hornberg. Through naval records and crew lists, they confirmed that this man had served aboard U-869. With this key piece of information, the divers were able to conclusively identify the wreck as the U-869. This identification was not just an exciting moment for the divers, but also for the broader historical and military community. The discovery of the wreck off the coast of New Jersey, far from where the U-869 had been officially reported to have sunk, was a significant revelation. The U.S. Navy, which had previously assumed the submarine had been destroyed near Gibraltar, now had to reconsider the historical record. The divers had solved a mystery that had remained unresolved for decades. The discovery also raised further questions. If the U-869 had been lost off the coast of New Jersey, why had it been so far from its intended mission in the Mediterranean? How had it ended up there? Was it misidentified during the battle near Gibraltar? Or was there something more unusual at play? The historical accounts from the war had long held that the The U-869 had been sunk by American forces near Gibraltar, but no one had ever definitively found the wreck to confirm this. In 1997, 6 years after the initial dive, the U.S. Navy officially acknowledged that the wreck discovered off New Jersey was indeed U-869. This was a groundbreaking moment, as it contradicted the long-standing belief that the submarine had gone down near Gibraltar. However, despite the official recognition of the wreck's location, the questions about how it had ended up there remained unanswered. The U-869 was part of the German Navy's long-range fleet of U-boats, designed to operate in the Atlantic Ocean. Its mission was to disrupt Allied shipping lanes, and it was equipped for extended missions far from German-controlled waters. The submarine was capable of traveling across the Atlantic, targeting merchant ships, and then returning to Europe. The fact that it had ended up so far from its expected location raised suspicions that something had gone wrong, whether it was a navigational error, a change of orders, or something else entirely. One possible explanation was that the U-869 had been rerouted without anyone knowing. German naval command was in chaos in the final years of the war, and orders were often conflicting or unclear. The communication system had broken down, and it was not unusual for submarines to be given last-minute changes to their assignments. The U-869 could have been redirected to a different mission, and its exact location was never properly recorded. Another possibility is that the U-869 was lost due to a failure of communication. The submarine had been in radio silence for several days before it was officially reported missing. This radio silence, combined with the absence of any distress signals, made it harder to track its movements and led to confusion about its final position. The fact that no one had been actively looking for the submarine in the waters off New Jersey made the discovery even more surprising. Despite the official recognition, the case remained shrouded in mystery. The discovery of the U-869 off New Jersey had solved some of the puzzle, but it opened up new questions about the submarine's final mission. What was it doing so far from its assigned area? Was it a victim of wartime confusion, or was there something more to the story? The divers' investigation revealed more than just the wreck itself. The items they recovered from the wreck, including personal belongings and equipment, gave a glimpse into life aboard the U-869. These findings helped piece together the story of the crew and provided valuable insights into the functioning of the submarine. The fact that they had identified the wreck was a monumental achievement, but the larger mystery of how and why U-869 ended up off the U.S. coast remained an open question. Supporters of this theory pointed to the lack of evidence for a combat engagement with an enemy vessel. There were no reports of torpedo strikes or attacks on Allied ships near U-869's final location. Furthermore, when divers examined the wreck, they found internal damage consistent with an explosion inside the submarine, but not a direct impact from an external force. The blast appeared to have come from within the vessel, likely caused by a torpedo detonating while still in its tube or shortly after being launched. This could have been the catastrophic event that sank the U-869, and it would explain why the crew had no time to react or attempt to escape. While this theory seemed plausible, it was not without its flaws. The wreckage of the U-869 did not show all the typical signs of a torpedo malfunction. For one, the external damage to the hull did not match the severity expected from a torpedo explosion close to the vessel. There were also other signs of damage to the forward section of the submarine, indicating that the blast had originated from inside, but without the full force of a direct torpedo strike. Despite these inconsistencies, the circle runner theory remained a strong contender. The second theory, which was more widely accepted at the time, was that U-869 had been destroyed by American depth charges. According to wartime records, on February 11, 1945, the U.S. Howard D. Trow and U.S. Coiner, two U.S. Navy ships, had engaged an unidentified German submarine near the eastern coast. The ships had reportedly detected a U-boat through sonar or hydrophones and launched a coordinated depth charge attack. After the war, this engagement was credited as the successful sinking of an unidentified U-boat, which was later believed to be U-869. However, this explanation raised several problems. The most significant issue was the timing. U-869 had been expected to be in the Mediterranean, near Gibraltar, not off the American coast. The two U.S. Navy ships had attacked a submarine in the area. But why hadn't anyone connected this event to U-869 sooner? If the wreck was truly U-869, why had it been lost in the first place, with no distress signals or communication from the submarine? The location of the wreck itself also raised questions. The site where the wreck of U-869 was found did not exactly match the coordinates reported by the U.S. Howard D. Crow and U.S. Coiner. It was close, but not an exact match, which was enough to cast doubt on the Navy's original claims. Another issue with this theory was the condition of the wreck. When divers explored the site, they found that several of the torpedo tubes on the U-869 were still sealed. If the submarine had been involved in combat and attacked by depth charges, why had it not fired its torpedoes in self-defense? The lack of any signs of an attack or an attempt to surface made it seem as though the submarine had been caught completely off guard. The wreck appeared to have sustained significant internal damage, including crushed sections and imploded compartments, which suggested that the explosion that sank the U-869 came from within the submarine rather than from an external attack. Theories about the sinking of the U-869 were further complicated by the discovery of the wreck itself. Many experts had long believed that the submarine had been sunk near Gibraltar, based on the wartime report. However, the divers' discovery off the coast of New Jersey made it clear that this was not the case. The lack of any official explanation for why the submarine was so far from its expected location led to speculation that U-869 had been involved in a secret or classified mission. Some believe that it may have been rerouted to the U.S. coast for a covert operation. This theory would explain the complete radio silence and the confusion about the submarine's final position. If U-869 had been given secret orders, they would have never been logged in official records, which would explain the lack of any traceable communication. This possibility became more plausible as divers continued to investigate the wreck. In 2024, after more than 2 decades of exploration, the team finally reached a previously inaccessible compartment of the submarine. The discovery of this sealed chamber revealed a treasure trove of items that had remained untouched since the day the U-869 sank. Among the recovered objects were personal belongings of the crew, ration tins, clothing, and even logbooks. But what truly stunned the researchers was the discovery of a ceremonial dagger, which appeared to belong to an officer. The dagger was engraved with a motto used by elite German naval units, and next to it, the divers found a marine dress uniform bearing the Iron Eagle insignia and a red armband with a swastika. But the most chilling find was a box of Nazi memorabilia, including a perfectly folded swastika flag and propaganda leaflets aimed at stirring discontent among the American public. There was also a partially encrypted codebook bearing markings from the AB, Nazi Germany's military intelligence service. The discovery of these items raised the disturbing possibility that U-869 had not just been patrolling the Atlantic, but may have been involved in covert operations on U.S. soil. If this theory were true, it would suggest that the Germans were operating much closer to the American coast than anyone had previously believed. The sealed compartment provided even more evidence to support the idea that U-869 may have been on a secret mission. The items recovered from the wreck were not standard equipment for a U-boat on a regular patrol. The presence of intelligence materials and propaganda leaflets pointed to the possibility that the submarine had been tasked with a covert operation. However, this theory remains unconfirmed, and the full scope of U-869's mission remains a mystery.